When the security guard blocked my path and pointed a gloved finger toward the overflowing dumpster around the back, I almost laughed in his face. He told me that staff entry was strictly through the service door, and that my rusted Honda Civic was bringing down the property value just by idling in the driveway. He had no idea that I could fire him with a single text message. He did not know that the signature on his paycheck was authorized by my office. He certainly did not know that I, Zara, the woman he was sneering at, owned the very ground he was standing on. But when my own mother stepped out of a limousine, saw me being humiliated, and handed me a bag of trash to carry inside, I realized that simply revealing my identity was not enough. I needed to let them dig their own graves first. Before I tell you how I turned their night of glory into a public execution, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been underestimated by the very people who should have protected you. I pulled my 10-year-old silver sedan up to the gleaming porte cochere of the Grand Othello. This hotel was the jewel of the city, a towering expanse of marble and gold leaf that screamed exclusivity. It was also the newest asset in my portfolio under Ventura Holdings, a fact that was buried under 3 layers of shell companies and non-disclosure agreements. To the world, and specifically to my family, I was just Zara, the college dropout who scraped by doing freelance graphic design. To the board of directors, I was the shark who had saved this hotel from bankruptcy 2 years ago. I put the car in park and stepped out, smoothing down my simple navy dress. It was elegant but understated, bought off the rack, a stark contrast to the parade of silk and sequins making its way through the revolving doors. I was here for my younger sister Bianca's engagement party. She was marrying Julian Huntington, a man whose family practically breathed old money and arrogance. "Excuse me, miss," a deep voice boomed. I turned to see the head valet, a man named Marcus, whose file I had reviewed just last week. He stepped in front of me, his chest puffed out, blocking my path to the main entrance. "I am here for the Huntington engagement party," I said, reaching for my purse to hand him my keys. Marcus looked at my car, then at my dress, and finally at my face with a look of pure disdain. "Deliveries are at the rear entrance. We do not allow vendors or staff to clutter the main drive. You need to move this heap immediately before the VIP guests arrive." I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. "I am not staff. I am a guest. My name is Zara Brooks." He did not even check his clipboard. He just shook his head, already waving at a Bentley pulling up behind me to go around. "Look, honey, we do not have time for this. If you are here to drop off the flowers or check coats, go around back. Do not make me call security to have you removed." I was about to pull out my phone and show him the digital owner's key that would override every lock in the building, but then I heard her voice, that sharp, high-pitched tone that had been the soundtrack of my childhood trauma. "Zara, what on earth are you doing?" I turned to see my mother, Patricia, stepping out of the Bentley that Marcus had been waving through. She looked immaculate in a floor-length silver gown, diamonds dripping from her ears. But her face was twisted in that familiar expression of disappointment she reserved exclusively for me. "Mom, this valet refuses to take my car," I said, hoping for a sliver of defense. "He thinks I am the help." Patricia looked at Marcus, then she looked at my car, and finally she looked at me with cold, evaluating eyes. She let out a short, sharp sigh, the kind that signaled I was exhausting her patience just by existing. "Well, look at you, Zara," she hissed, stepping closer so the other guests wouldn't hear. "You drive up in this scrap metal wearing a dress that looks like it came from a discount bin. Can you blame him for thinking you are staff? Honestly, you are embarrassing us and the party has not even started yet." My stomach dropped. Even now, after I had built an empire in secret, the little girl inside me still flinched at her words. "I am your daughter, Mom. I am a guest." "Not looking like that. You are not," she snapped. She reached into the back seat of the Bentley and pulled out a large, heavy tote bag filled with last-minute party favors and decorations. "Since you are already causing a scene, make yourself useful. The event planner forgot these. Take them to the ballroom." And Zara listened to the man. Go through the service entrance. I do not want the Huntington family seeing my daughter walking through the lobby looking like a stray cat. She shoved the heavy bag into my arms, the handles dug into my skin. But Mom, I started. Do not argue with me. She cut me off, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Bianca has worked too hard to land a man like Julian. Do not ruin her night with your need for attention. Go around the back, now. She turned on her heel, flashing a dazzling fake smile at the valet. I am so sorry about her, Marcus. Please keep the driveway clear for the important guests. Right away, Mrs. Brooks. Marcus beamed, giving me a smug look of victory. You heard the lady. Move it. I stood there for a moment, the heavy bag dragging down my arms, watching my mother disappear through the golden revolving doors without looking back once. The humiliation burned my throat hot and acrid. I looked up at the massive neon sign above the entrance, the Grand Othello. I took a deep breath, the cold night air filling my lungs. They wanted me to be the help fine. I would play the role. I would walk through the service entrance. I would carry their bags. I would let them treat me like dirt, because the lower they pushed me, the harder they would fall when I pulled the rug out from under them. I got back into my car and drove toward the dark, narrow alleyway behind the hotel where the dumpsters were kept. I parked next to a grease trap, grabbed the bag my mother had thrown at me, and walked toward the steel door marked Employees Only. As I pushed it open, I smiled. My mother thought she was sending me to the back of the house. She did not realize she was sending the owner into the command center. The game had officially begun. The heavy steel door slammed shut behind me, sealing off the cool night air and immersing me instantly in the controlled chaos of the hotel kitchen. The air was thick with the scent of searing scallops and reduction sauces, a sensory overload that usually made me feel powerful. This was the engine room of my investment, the place where profit margins were made or broken. I adjusted the strap of the tote bag my mother had forced upon me, feeling the cheap plastic handles dig into my shoulder. To anyone looking, I was a harried assistant, a poor relation earning her keep by hauling party favors. But as I moved deeper into the stainless steel labyrinth, the dynamic shifted. A sous chef looked up from a line of hors d'oeuvres, his eyes widening in recognition. He nudged the line cook next to him, and a wave of silence rippled down the prep station. Henri, the executive chef I had personally recruited from a Michelin-starred restaurant in Lyon, wiped his hands on a towel and started to rush toward me, his face lighting up with deferential respect. Madame Zara, he began, his voice pitching up in surprise. We were not expecting an inspection tonight. I would have prepared the chef's table if I had known. I quickly held a finger to my lips, stopping him in his tracks. Not tonight, Henri, I said softly, my voice barely carrying over the hum of the ventilation hoods. Tonight I am not the owner. I am just a guest, a very unimportant guest. Please continue as if I am not here. Henri looked confused, glancing at the tacky bag of decorations I was clutching, but he nodded slowly. As you wish, madame. Just then, the hotel's general manager, Mr. Henderson, rounded the corner. He looked frazzled, a stack of papers in his hand. When he saw me, he nearly dropped his clipboard. Ms. Brooks, thank goodness. I have been trying to reach your assistant. The supplier for the vintage champagne is holding the shipment at the dock. They require a signature for the $50,000 deposit immediately, or they will not release the crates for the wedding toast. I looked around to ensure no family members were near the service doors. Hand me the pen, I said calmly. But Ms. Brooks Henderson stammered, looking at the trash bag on my shoulder. You are carrying... I know what I am carrying, I interrupted, shifting the weight of the bag that symbolized my family's disrespect. Give me the clipboard. I balanced the heavy tote on my hip and took the document. In 2 seconds, I scanned the terms, verified the account number, and slashed my signature across the bottom line. That signature just authorized more money than my sister Bianca earned in 2 years of modeling. I handed the clipboard back to a stunned Henderson. Get the champagne. And Henderson, not a word to the Huntingtons. As far as they know, I am just Zara, the sister who can barely pay rent. Understood, he whispered, disappearing back into his office. I continued toward the ballroom entrance, passing a station where two waiters were polishing silverware. They did not see me, but I heard them clearly. I give it 6 months. One waiter muttered aggressively, wiping a fork. Did you hear the groom screaming at the florist? He called her incompetent because the lilies were cream, not ivory. The whole family is a nightmare. Tell me about it, the other replied. The mother of the groom tried to get me fired because I poured water from the wrong side. Rich people are the worst. I feel bad for the sister, though, the one driving the Honda. I heard the valet laughing about her. I paused, a bitter smile touching my lips. My staff, the people my family ignored, saw everything. They had more class in their little fingers than the entire Huntington clan had in their bank accounts. It was a strange, lonely validation. Here among the steam and the noise, I was the queen. I commanded respect. I moved mountains with a pen stroke. But in 10 seconds I would walk through those double doors and become the peasant again. I took a deep breath, steeling myself against the cold reality awaiting me. I had to play my part. I had to let them think they were winning. The juxtaposition of signing a $50,000 check while being treated like a mule was almost poetic. It was the fuel I needed. I pushed through the heavy swinging doors, leaving the warmth of the kitchen for the chilled, perfumed air of the hallway leading to the ballroom. The noise of clattering pans was instantly replaced by the soft swell of a string quartet. I kept my head down, clutching the bag, trying to make myself invisible as I headed toward the service corridor my mother had banished me to. But invisibility was not an option. Well, look who finally decided to show up. A voice rang out, dripping with false sweetness. I looked up to see Bianca standing right in the center of the hallway. She looked flawless in a custom gown that probably cost more than my car, her phone held high as she live-streamed to her thousands of followers. She panned the camera directly at me, zooming in on the bulky, ugly bag I was carrying. "Say hi to the fans." "Zara," she chirped, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Everyone. This is my big sister. She is helping the staff tonight because, well, she just loves to be useful. Isn't that right, Zara?" I stared at the phone lens, then at her. The conflict had just moved from the parking lot to the main stage, and she had no idea she was filming her own demise. I stared into the ring light attached to my sister Bianca's phone, blinking against the sudden glare. She had cornered me in the hallway, blocking my path to the service entrance, effectively turning my humiliation into content for her 50,000 followers. To her, I was not a person. I was a prop, a plot device in the carefully curated reality show of her life, where she was the benevolent princess, and I was the unfortunate frog who refused to turn into a prince. "Hey everyone, look who I found helping out behind the scenes." Bianca cooed at her screen, pouting her lips in that practiced way influencers do to feign sympathy. "It is my big sister Zara. You guys remember me telling you about her, right? She is just so dedicated. Even though she is going through a really rough patch right now, she still insisted on carrying the trash for my party. Can we get some hearts in the chat for Zara?" She squeezed my shoulder, her long acrylic nails digging into my skin. I wanted to shake her off. I wanted to tell her that the bag contained her mother's poor planning, not trash, and that the rough patch she was referring to was a complete fabrication she invented to make herself feel superior. But I stood still, the heavy straps of the tote bag cutting into my palm. "I am not going through a rough patch, Bianca," I said, keeping my voice level, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "I own my own home. I have a career." Bianca laughed, a tinkling, condescending sound that echoed off the marble walls. She turned back to the camera, rolling her eyes playfully. "Oh, you guys. She is so proud. That is what I love about her. She calls her little freelance art projects a career. It is adorable, really. But seriously, guys, this is what family is all about. Lifting each other up when one of us falls down. And honestly, Zara has fallen pretty hard, but we are here to catch her." I felt a vein throb in my temple. The narrative she was spinning was so absolute, so impenetrable, that the truth bounced right off it. She needed me to be a failure. If I was successful, then her position as the golden child, the one who married rich to save the family name, became irrelevant. Actually, I started to say taking a step forward, but she cut me off, holding a hand up to my face while reading comments on her screen. "Aw, user Emily says you are so brave, Zara. And look, Sarah says, do not give up hope. See, everyone is rooting for you. And guess what? I have the best news to share on the stream." She turned the camera back to selfie mode, framing both of us, though I was relegated to the blurry background. My amazing fiancé Julian is literally a saint. We were talking last night about how hard it is for people with limited skill sets to find work in this economy, and Julian promised me that he would pull some strings at his company. My ears perked up. His company. Technically, Julian worked for a subsidiary of Ventura Holdings. My company. He is going to get you an interview for a switchboard operator position, Bianca announced, triumphantly beaming, as if she had just handed me a winning lottery ticket. It is entry-level, obviously, and the pay is minimum wage, but Julian said if you keep your head down and answer the phones politely, you might get dental benefits after a year. Isn't that incredible? You could finally have health insurance, Zara. The irony was so sharp it almost drew blood. Julian, a mid-level marketing director who is currently under investigation for embezzlement by my audit team, was offering me a minimum wage job at a company I owned. He was offering me dental benefits when I signed the approval for the company-wide insurance policy last month. "I do not need Julian's charity, Bianca," I said, my voice hardening. "And I certainly do not need a job answering phones at his office. I might know more about his workplace than he does." Bianca gasped, mocking shock for her audience. "Oh my God, you guys, do you hear this? This is exactly what I deal with. You try to help people and they just get bitter. Zara, sweetie, beggars cannot be choosers. You are 32 years old and you are carrying a trash bag at my engagement party. Swallow your pride. Julian is doing you a massive favor. He is risking his reputation to recommend someone like you, someone like me." The phrase hung in the air, heavy and toxic. Someone like me meant someone poor, someone dark-skinned who did not marry a white man, someone who did not fit their mold. I was about to drop the bag and tell her exactly who I was. I was about to tell her that I could buy her fiancé's career and crush it like a paper cup. But then the atmosphere in the hallway shifted. The air seemed to get colder, sucked out of the room by a massive ego entering the space. Bianca's eyes lit up and she squealed, forgetting about her charity case sister instantly. "Speak of the devil," she whispered dramatically to her phone. "Here he comes, the man of the hour, my king." I turned to look down the long, gilded corridor. Walking toward us, surrounded by a group of sycophants laughing too hard at his jokes, was Julian. He moved with the easy, unearned confidence of a man who has never been told no in his life. He wore a tuxedo that cost more than my father's car, and he walked as if the ground was honored to touch his shoes. He did not look at the architecture or the staff or the guests. He looked only at his reflection in the glass panes as he passed. He was the architect of my family's delusion, the man who had convinced them that money was the only metric of human value. And as he got closer, I saw his eyes slide right over me, not registering a sister-in-law, not registering a human being, but seeing only an obstacle, a smudge in the background of his perfect night. He had no idea that the smudge was about to become a stain he could never wash out. I watched Julian Huntington glide closer, a shark in a tuxedo, navigating a sea of admirers. He had never met me in person. I was the ghost of the Brooks family, the sister who was conveniently busy or uninvited to previous gatherings. He had likely only seen that one unflattering photo from my college graduation that my mother kept on the mantelpiece, the one where I looked tired and frizzy-haired. Standing here now in my simple navy dress, without a speck of jewelry, holding a trash bag, only moments ago I did not register on his radar as a relative. To him, I was just part of the scenery, like the potted ferns or the velvet ropes. He stopped 3 feet away from me, his eyes scanning the room for something more important. Then his gaze landed on me. It was not a look of recognition, it was a look of expectation. He lifted his hand and snapped his fingers. The sound was sharp and loud, cutting through the ambient string quartet music like a whip crack. Hey you, Scotch, neat, and make it a double. I have had a long flight. I stood frozen. The sheer audacity of it momentarily paralyzed me. I was the owner of the hotel he was standing in. I paid the salary of the bartender he was demanding a drink from. I could have had security escort him out for harassment with a single nod, but before I could open my mouth to correct him, a tittering laugh erupted from behind him. It was the Huntington clan. His mother Meredith and his sister Courtney were standing there clutching their champagne flutes. They looked me up and down with the kind of undisguised amusement usually reserved for a circus act. God! Julian Courtney giggled, covering her mouth with a manicured hand. The service here is atrocious. She is just staring at you. Is she deaf or just stupid? Meredith sighed, shaking her head. It is hard to find good help these days, darling. They all want $15 an hour, but they cannot even pour a drink without a roadmap. My blood boiled. I opened my mouth to speak to tell them exactly who I was and how much their suite cost per night, but a hand clamped down on my arm. It was painful, the nails digging into my flesh through the fabric of my dress. I turned to see my mother, Patricia. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with panic. She was not looking at me with concern. She was looking at the Huntingtons with terror. She was terrified that her perfect illusion was about to shatter. She did not want to explain why her eldest daughter was being mistaken for a waitress. It was easier to just let me be the waitress. Patricia reached out to a passing server, a young man named Tim, who I knew was working double shifts to pay for nursing school. She practically snatched a glass of amber liquid from his tray, nearly spilling it. Here, she hissed, shoving the glass into my hand. Her voice was a low, desperate growl that only I could hear. Give it to him. Do not say a word. Do not make a scene, Zara. If you ruin this for Bianca, I will never forgive you. Just serve the drink. I looked at the glass in my hand. Then I looked at my mother. The betrayal was complete. She was not just passive anymore. She was an active participant in my degradation. She was prioritizing the ego of a man she hardly knew over the dignity of her own child. Fine, I whispered the word, tasting like ash in my mouth. I took the glass. My hand was steady, surprisingly so. I channeled every ounce of the cold, calculated fury that had helped me build a business empire from nothing. I turned back to Julian. He had already turned away, continuing his conversation, assuming his order would be fulfilled simply because he demanded it. I stepped into his personal space. Excuse me, sir. Julian turned back, looking annoyed at the interruption. He reached for the glass without even looking at my face, his fingers brushing against mine. He treated me like a vending machine. You're Scotch? I said, my voice smooth and dark, carrying a weight that made him pause for a fraction of a second. He took a sip, his eyes already drifting back to his adoring audience. But I did not step away. I held my ground, forcing him to acknowledge my presence for just 1 second longer. Be careful, I said, allowing a small, razor-sharp smile to curve my lips. It goes down smooth, but it has a kick. You would not want to choke on it. Julian frowned, finally, making eye contact. There was something in my tone, a threat wrapped in velvet, that confused him. He laughed nervously, a short barking sound. Yeah, thanks, honey. Keep them coming. He turned his back on me, dismissing me once again. The Huntingtons laughed, creating a wall of sound that shut me out. I stood there watching the man who was stealing from my company drink my liquor, surrounded by a family that despised me, protected by a mother who was ashamed of me. I gripped my empty hands into fists at my sides. Enjoy the drink, Julian, I thought, because it is the last thing you will ever get from me for free. The bill is coming due and you cannot even afford the interest. I turned on my heel and walked away, not toward the kitchen this time, but toward the seating chart. It was time to find out exactly where they had decided to put the help. I walked into the grand ballroom, and for a split second, I allowed myself to admire the architecture. The vaulted ceilings were draped in cascading silk wisteria, and the crystal chandeliers which I had personally selected during the renovation 2 years ago cast a warm golden glow over the 300 guests. It was a masterpiece of event planning, a night of opulence designed to signal to the world that the Brooks and Huntington families were merging into a dynasty. But as I scanned the room for my seat, the beauty of the venue dissolved into a stark map of social hierarchy. I checked the seating chart displayed on a gilded easel near the entrance. My eyes naturally went to the head table, assuming that as the sister of the bride, I would be seated with the immediate family. But my name was not there. I scanned the tables adjacent to the dance floor, reserved for close relatives and VIPs. I was not there either. My finger traced down the list, moving past the business associates, past the college friends, past the distant cousins, until I finally found it at the very bottom of the chart. Zara Brooks, table 19. I turned and looked for the table number. It was not on the main floor. It was not even near the windows with the view of the bay. Table 19 was tucked into the furthest corner of the room, wedged tightly between the swinging doors of the service kitchen and the entrance to the restrooms. It was the Siberian exile of wedding seating. As I walked toward it, navigating through the maze of tables where people were already laughing and clinking glasses, I felt the temperature drop. The air conditioning vent was positioned directly above table 19, creating a freezing draft that explained why this spot was usually reserved for storage. When I arrived, the humiliation was complete. The table was half the size of the others, lacking the elaborate floral centerpieces that adorned the VIP sections. Instead of roses, we had a small, sad candle. My dinner companions were a collection of the family's skeletons. There was Great-Aunt Mildred, who refused to wear her hearing aid and was currently shouting at a waiter. There was my second cousin Kevin, who had just been released from rehab and was being visibly ignored by his own parents across the room. And there was me. The message was loud and clear. We were the unsightly elements of the family, hidden away in the shadows, so we would not spoil the aesthetic of the live stream. I pulled out my chair, wincing as the kitchen door swung open and bumped against the back of it, releasing a cloud of steam and the smell of dish soap. From this vantage point, I had a direct line of sight to the raised dais where the families were seated. My parents, Patricia and Robert, were laughing at something Meredith Huntington was saying. They looked radiant, basking in the reflected glory of their wealthy in-laws. They did not look for me. They did not care that their eldest daughter was sitting next to the toilets. Just as I sat down, the music lowered slightly as Julian stood up to offer a toast. He held a microphone in one hand and his scotch in the other. He scanned the room, his eyes glazing over the hundreds of adoring faces until they landed on the dark corner where I sat. A smirk curled his lips, and he decided that my degradation needed to be a public spectacle. He pointed his glass directly at me. "I see my future sister-in-law found her seat," he boomed. His voice amplified across the silent hall. Everyone turned. Hundreds of heads swiveled to look at me sitting next to the bathroom door. "It is actually a perfect spot for her." Julian continued chuckling into the microphone. "She is right next to the kitchen and the mop closet. So if anyone spills a drink or makes a mess tonight, she is conveniently placed to clean it up." A ripple of laughter went through the room. It started with the Huntingtons, loud and cruel, and then spread to the rest of the guests who wanted to be in on the joke. I looked at my mother. She was not frowning. She was covering her mouth with a napkin, her shoulders shaking with suppressed giggles. She was laughing. My own mother was laughing at a man treating her daughter like a servant. I felt a coldness settle in my chest that had nothing to do with the air conditioning vent. The last tether of loyalty I held for this family snapped. It did not break with a scream or a cry. It broke with a terrifying silence. I did not look down. I did not blush. I picked up my napkin and placed it calmly across my lap. Then, while the room was still chuckling and turning back to their appetizers, I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. I opened my secure messaging app and found the contact labeled David CFO. My thumbs moved with lethal precision. "I want a full forensic audit of the marketing department's expenses for the last 24 months," I typed. specifically focusing on Julian Huntington. Cross-reference his vendor list with the guest list for tonight's event at the Othello. If he used a single cent of company money for this party, I want the paper trail. I hit send. I watched the 3 dots appear as David replied instantly. On it. Do you want security on standby? I looked up at Julian, who was now kissing Bianca while the room cheered. He looked so confident, so untouchable. He thought he was the king of the world because he could humiliate a woman he thought was powerless. He had no idea that the woman sitting by the toilet just signed his professional death warrant. Not yet, I typed back. Let him enjoy the appetizer. We will serve the main course later. The soup at table 19 arrived cold, a watery potato leek concoction that tasted suspiciously like instant mix, while I watched the servers deliver steaming bowls of lobster bisque to the head table. The segregation was so petty it was almost impressive. But as I stirred the gray liquid in my bowl, I realized the temperature of the food was the least of the problems at this table. The heavy silence around me was not just awkwardness, it was the silence of people who had been beaten down. To my left sat Uncle Ray. I had not seen him in nearly 5 years, but my memories of him were vibrant. He was the man who always slipped me a $20 bill at family reunions when my mother refused to buy me school books. He ran a small but proud commercial linen supply company that had been in our family for 2 generations. But tonight, the man sitting next to me was a ghost. His suit was frayed at the cuffs, his shoulders were slumped, and he was staring at the white tablecloth beneath his plate with a look of profound grief. "Uncle Ray," I said, softly, placing a hand on his trembling arm. "Are you all right? You have not touched your food." He flinched as if waking from a nightmare. He looked at me, his eyes rimmed with red, and let out a shaky breath. "I am fine, Zara. It is just hard to be here. It is hard to watch everyone celebrating him." He gestured vaguely toward the head table where Julian was currently laughing loudly, holding court with a glass of wine in hand. Why, I asked, sensing there was more to this than just a dislike of Julian's personality. Ray picked up the corner of the tablecloth, rubbing the fabric between his rough, calloused thumb and forefinger. "This fabric. It is cheap polyester blend. It stains easily and tears if you look at it wrong, but they are paying top dollar for it." I frowned, confused. "What do you mean I used to supply the linens for all the hotels in this chain?" Ray whispered, his voice cracking. "For 10 years my company provided the highest quality Egyptian cotton for the Grand Othello and its sister properties. We were proud of that contract. It kept my employees fed. It paid for my daughter's college. But 3 months ago, right after Julian got promoted to the procurement division, everything changed." I felt a chill run down my spine. Julian was in marketing, but he had obviously expanded his reach. "Go on," I urged. Ray wiped a tear from his cheek, hoping the others wouldn't see. "Julian called me into his office. He told me that our prices were too high. I showed him the breakdown, showed him that we were barely making a profit margin because we refused to use sweatshop labor. He did not care. He told me that unless I could cut the price by 40% and pay a consulting fee to a private account he set up, he would void the contract." I gripped my spoon so hard my knuckles turned white. A consulting fee. That was a polite word for a bribe. "And a 40% cut would have bankrupted you," I said. "Exactly." Ray nodded, looking defeated. I refused. I told him I run an honest business. 2 days later, he terminated the contract for cause, citing fabricated quality control issues. He replaced us with a shell company that imports this garbage you see on the table. My business is gone, Zara. I had to lay off 20 people last week. I am losing my house. And here I am eating cold soup at his engagement party, because your father said it would look bad if the whole family did not show up to support the happy couple. I looked across the room at Julian. He was beaming, clinking glasses with my father who was undoubtedly bragging about his new son-in-law's business acumen. They were celebrating a predator. Julian was not just an arrogant man who mistreated waitresses. He was a corporate parasite who was cannibalizing the local community and destroying honest livelihoods to line his own pockets. He was stealing from my company, damaging the brand reputation I had worked tirelessly to build, and crushing my own uncle in the process. The rage that filled me was different from the humiliation I felt earlier. This was not about a dress or a seating chart. This was about justice. Julian had made a fatal error. He thought he was just squeezing a small vendor. He did not know he was squeezing the uncle of the chairwoman of the board. I reached into my purse and pulled out a tissue, handing it to Ray. He blew his nose, looking ashamed of his tears. "I am sorry, Zara," he mumbled. "I should not burden you. You have enough problems with your mom treating you like this." I leaned in close, my voice dropping to a register of absolute steel. "Uncle Ray, listen to me carefully. Do not sell your house. Do not lay off anyone else." He looked at me, confused by the intensity in my eyes. "What can you do, honey? You are a graphic designer. I am a lot of things," I said, looking directly at the tablecloth that represented his ruin. "And tonight, I am the person who is going to fix this." I pulled out my phone again. The message to my CFO was already sent, but I needed to add one more specific instruction. I typed quickly. "Addendum to audit. Pull all vendor contracts authorized by Julian Huntington in the last 90 days. Specifically look for the termination of Ray's linens and the onboarding of any new textile suppliers. I want the ownership records of the new suppliers. If I find out Julian is getting a kickback, I want the police waiting at the back exit." I hit send and looked back at Ray. "Trust me," I said. "By the time dessert is served, you are going to get that contract back, and you are going to get it with a 20% raise and a public apology." Ray looked at me as if I were crazy, but he saw something in my face that made him stop crying. He saw the same look my grandfather used to have before he closed a massive deal. He saw power. I sat back in my chair, staring across the room at Julian. He was laughing, his head thrown back, exposing his throat. He had no idea that the hunter was sitting at table 19, and she had just locked onto her target. I was just finalizing the text to my audit team when a shadow fell across table 19. It was not a waiter coming to refill the tepid water glasses. It was a shadow that smelled of aggressive floral perfume and entitlement. I looked up to see Meredith Huntington standing over me like a hawk inspecting a field mouse. Julian's mother was a woman who wore her wealth like armor. She was draped in a silver gown that matched her son's arrogance, and her neck was weighed down by a diamond necklace that I immediately recognized as a piece from the Van Cleef collection, likely costing more than my parents' mortgage. She did not sit down. She stood there clutching her champagne flute, forcing me to crane my neck to look at her. It was a classic power move designed to make me feel small physically as well as socially. "Hello, Meredith," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "To what do we owe the pleasure?" Meredith did not return the greeting. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her drink, her eyes scanning me from my simple pearl earrings down to my off-the-rack navy dress. Her gaze was not just critical, it was surgical. She was dissecting me, looking for every flaw she could find to confirm her own superiority. "I just wanted to come over and offer my condolences," she said, her voice dripping with faux sympathy that was sharp enough to cut glass. "Condolences?" I asked, leaning back in my rickety chair. "Did I miss a funeral?" Meredith laughed, a dry, brittle sound. "No, dear. I mean condolences for your situation. It must be terribly difficult for you to sit here in the dark while your sister shines so brightly. Bianca is truly exquisite. She fits into our family so naturally. She has that elegance, that polish." She let the word hang in the air, implying everything she did not say. She was talking about class. She was talking about the fact that Bianca had molded herself into the perfect trophy wife for her son, erasing any rough edges, while I had remained authentically myself. "We Huntingtons have very high standards," Meredith continued, leaning in closer so her whisper felt like a slap. "We value image above all else. Presentation is everything, And frankly, Zara, looking at you is a bit distinct. Your hair, your dress, your general aura. It is all a bit heavy, isn't it? It lacks the refinement we are used to. I felt the muscles in my jaw tighten. She was insulting my blackness, my choices and my existence in one breath, wrapping it all up in the coded language of high society. It is a relief, really, she sighed, inspecting her manicure, that Bianca takes after your father's side of the family. If she looked like you, well, Julian might not have been so inclined to propose. We have a brand to maintain after all. The table went silent. Uncle Ray had stopped eating his soup. He looked terrified. But I did not feel fear. I felt the cold, hard weight of the secret I was carrying. I looked at this woman, this matriarch of a family that was currently funding their lifestyle with embezzled money from my accounts. She was lecturing me on standards while wearing stolen diamonds. High standards, I repeated slowly, letting the words roll off my tongue. That is an interesting choice of words, Meredith. She blinked, surprised that I had spoken back. Excuse me. You talk about standards, I said, standing up slowly, so that I was finally eye to eye with her. But when you say standards, do you mean moral standards, or do you just mean standards for spending other people's money? Meredith's eyes widened. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. The color drained from her face beneath her heavy makeup. I beg your pardon, she sputtered, clutching her necklace as if I might try to snatch it. You heard me, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous low register. You stand here and judge my dress, my hair, and my worth. You talk about image. But image is expensive, Meredith. And I wonder, does the Huntington family actually pay for that image? Or do you just find someone else to foot the bill and then insult them for not looking expensive enough? For a second, I saw true fear in her eyes. It was a flash of recognition. Deep down, she knew her son was a fraud. She knew their lifestyle was a house of cards. She just did not know that I was the wind that was about to blow it down. You are rude, she hissed, her composure cracking. And you are bitter. I can see why you are single. No man wants a woman who speaks out of turn. She spun around her silver dress, swishing violently, and marched back toward the VIP section. I watched her go. I saw her make a beeline for Julian. She grabbed his arm, pulling him away from a conversation. She whispered something frantically into his ear, gesturing vaguely back at table 19. Julian looked over at me. His face darkened. He did not look scared yet. He looked annoyed. He looked like a man who had just realized that the pest control he hired had failed to do the job. He said something to his mother, patted her hand, and then started walking toward me. I sat back down and picked up my spoon. The soup was cold, but revenge was heating up nicely. Let him come. I had a few more truths to serve him, and I knew he wasn't going to like the taste. I needed to step away from the table before I screamed. The air around table 19 felt stagnant, heavy, with the scent of cheap wax candles and the lingering perfume of my mother's betrayal. My phone buzzed in my clutch with a notification from David, my CFO. The subject line simply read, "Urgent discrepancies found." I knew I needed a quiet place to read the full report and give David the green light for the next phase of the investigation, but the hallway was crowded with guests mingling near the bar, and I could not risk anyone seeing the confidential documents on my screen. I spotted the entrance to the restrooms down a secluded corridor lined with velvet wallpaper. The door to the ladies' room swung open, releasing a cacophony of chatter and laughter. I could not deal with more judgment or fake smiles, so I made a split-second decision. The heavy mahogany door to the men's lounge was slightly ajar, and the room beyond was silent. I slipped inside, figuring the anteroom would be empty while everyone was distracted by the speeches. The lounge was more luxurious than my first apartment, with leather armchairs, a flat-screen TV playing silent news, and a shoe-shine station that looked like a throne. I leaned against the cool marble wall near the sinks, my hands shaking slightly as I unlocked my phone. But before I could open the file, a voice echoed from the inner stalls. It was loud, brash, and unmistakably Julian's. He was not alone. He was on the phone, and the acoustics of the tiled room amplified every word like he was speaking directly into a microphone. "Yeah, bro, Did you see the size of that rock on her finger? 2 carats, flawless. It shines so bright it practically blinds you. I froze. I instinctively pressed my thumb over my screen to dim the light, making myself invisible in the shadows of the entryway. No, are you kidding? Julian laughed, a cruel hacking sound that grated against the expensive tile. I did not pay for it. What kind of idiot uses his own money for a prop? I pulled $200,000 straight from the marketing budget. We labeled it under the spring campaign expenses. My breath caught in my throat. I had suspected he was padding expenses, but this was direct embezzlement. He was admitting to a felony within earshot of the woman who owned the company he was robbing. I quietly swiped to my voice memo app and hit the red record button. The timer started ticking, capturing every damning syllable. Ventura Holdings. Please. Julian scoffed, his voice dripping with disdain. Those corporate dinosaurs in the audit department have not looked at our branch ledgers in 5 years. They are too busy worrying about their stock prices to notice a few $100,000 missing from a regional office. I buried the transaction under consulting fees for a shell agency. By the time they figure it out, if they ever do, I will be married, the money will be laundered, and I will be untouchable. I watched the red waveform on my phone screen jump with every incriminating sentence. He was not just stealing, he was mocking the very people who signed his paychecks. He called my team dinosaurs. He called my oversight weak. He was bragging about stealing $200,000 to buy an engagement ring for my sister, effectively making her an accessory to his crime. And the best part, Julian continued, his voice lowering to a conspiratorial whisper, is that the Brooks family thinks I am some sort of financial wizard. Her dad treats me like I am the second coming of Warren Buffett. If only they knew their precious golden boy was spending their daughter's inheritance before he even got it. Anyway, I gotta go. I have to go act like I love these people for another 3 hours. I heard the beep of the call ending, followed by the sound of a flushing toilet and a stall door unlatching. I knew I should run. I should slip out the door and disappear back into the party. But my feet felt rooted to the floor. I was not afraid. I was furious. I pocketed my phone, ensuring the recording was saved, and stood my ground as Julian rounded the corner to the sinks. He was adjusting his silk tie in the mirror, whistling a tune, when he saw my reflection behind him. He jumped, spinning around so fast he nearly knocked over a stack of linen towels. His face went through a rapid transformation from shock to recognition and finally to that familiar sneering arrogance. "What the hell are you doing in here?" he demanded, stepping toward me aggressively. "This is the men's room, Zara. Can you not read, or are you just desperate for attention?" He looked me up and down, his eyes narrowing. "I came in to make a call," I said, my voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. It was too loud outside. Julian laughed, stepping into my personal space until I could smell the scotch on his breath. "Making a call. Or were you listening? You are a freak, you know that, rinsing around in the men's room stalking me. Do you have a crush on me, Zara? Is that it? Are you jealous that your sister got the prize and you got the trash bag?" He reached out and flicked a stray lock of hair from my shoulder, a gesture that was patronizing and invasive. "Get out of here before I call security and have you thrown out for perverted behavior," he spat. "And do not think anyone will believe whatever you think you heard. You are nobody. I am the star of this show." I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the sweat beading on his upper lip. I saw the slight tremor in his hand. Beneath the bluster, he was terrified. He just did not know that the monster he was afraid of was standing right in front of him. "I am leaving, Julian," I said, backing toward the door. "Enjoy your moment. It is going to be a very short show." I turned and walked out, leaving him alone with his reflection. As the heavy door clicked shut behind me, I touched the phone in my pocket. I had the gun. Now I just needed to pull the trigger. I did not get more than 10 steps down the velvet-lined corridor before I realized I was being followed. The heavy thud of dress shoes on the marble floor echoed behind me, matching my pace with predatory precision. I stopped and turned around. Julian was standing there, leaning against a decorative pillar, with a look of casual menace that made my skin crawl. He had not returned to the ballroom to bask in his applause. He had waited for me. I decided to give him one lifeline, one chance to save himself from total destruction. I looked him dead in the eye and kept my voice steady. Julian, you need to go back in there and tell my parents the truth. Tell them about the marketing fund. Tell them where the ring money actually came from. If you confess now, maybe the company will just fire you instead of pressing charges. His reaction was visceral. He did not look guilty. He looked amused. He pushed off the pillar and walked toward me, invading my personal space until I was forced to step back against the cold wall. He placed one hand on the wall beside my head, trapping me. The smell of expensive scotch and arrogance was suffocating. You really are pathetic, Zara. Do you think you can blackmail me? Do you think a few overheard sentences in a bathroom are going to bring me down? He laughed, a low rumble in his chest that vibrated through the small space between us. Let us play this out. You walk in there and tell your parents that their golden boy is a thief. I will just say you are jealous. I will say you asked me for money and I said no, so you made up a story. Who do you think they will believe? The daughter who drives a rusted Honda and cleans up trash, or the future vice president of marketing who just bought their other daughter a Porsche? He was right about one thing. My parents would believe him. They were addicted to the illusion of his success. But he was wrong about the power dynamic. He thought he was the shark in the tank, unaware that he was swimming with a leviathan. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that was more terrifying than a shout. You are a gnat, Zara. You are an annoyance. I make more money in a quarterly bonus than you will see in your entire lifetime. I could buy your pathetic little life and sell it for scraps, and nobody would even notice you were gone. So do yourself a favor. Go back to your table by the toilet, eat your cold soup, and keep your mouth shut. Because if you try to come for me, I will crush you. He patted my cheek, a gesture so demeaning it took every ounce of my self-control not to break his fingers right there. Then he straightened his tuxedo jacket, checked his reflection in a wall mirror, and strode back toward the music and the laughter. I watched him go. I listened to the applause that erupted as he re-entered the ballroom. He thought he had won. He thought he had scared me into submission. I reached up and brushed the spot on my cheek where he had touched me, as if wiping away a smudge of dirt. I smoothed the fabric of my dress. He wanted a war. He wanted to crush me. He had no idea that he had just declared war on the general of the army. I took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. Fine, Julian. You want a fight. You have got one. I turned and walked back toward the ballroom, not as a victim, but as an executioner walking toward the scaffold. I walked back to table 19 and sat down, my hands trembling slightly in my lap. Uncle Ray looked at me with concern, offering me a dinner roll as a peace offering, but my appetite was gone. Across the room, Julian was making his rounds, playing the part of the benevolent prince. He laughed at jokes that were not funny and clapped the backs of men he secretly despised. I watched him move through the crowd, his eyes darting toward me every few seconds to ensure I was still in my place, still submissive. When our eyes locked, he smiled. It was not a smile of warmth. It was the smile of a predator who had decided that the hunt was not quite over. He grabbed a fresh glass of red wine from a passing waiter, a dark, heavy Cabernet, that swirled ominously in the crystal goblet, and began walking straight toward my table. He did not walk in a straight line. He meandered, weaving through the guests, ensuring he had an audience as he approached the corner where the family outcasts were seated. As he reached table 19, he sped up slightly. I saw it happen in slow motion. He locked his gaze on a non-existent wrinkle in the carpet, exaggerated a stumble, and lunged forward. Whoops! He shouted, his voice theatrically loud. His arm jerked forward, and the contents of the wineglass launched into the air. It was a direct hit. The dark red liquid splashed across my chest, soaking instantly into the fabric of my navy blue dress. It ran down my lap, dripping onto my legs and the floor. The cold wetness shocked me, but the symbolism burned hotter. It looked like a gunshot wound. It looked like he had just marked me. A collective gasp went through the room, followed immediately by a ripple of laughter. It started with the Huntingtons, of course. Courtney covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking. Then the other guests joined in, relieved that the awkward tension had been broken by a moment of slapstick comedy at the expense of the poor relation. "Oh my God, I am so sorry," Julian exclaimed, his voice dripping with insincerity, as he dabbed uselessly at my shoulder with a cocktail napkin. "I am so clumsy. I did not see you sitting there in the dark." I sat frozen, the wine seeping through to my skin, sticky and cold. I looked up at him, and for a second, his mask slipped. He winked. A quick, subtle twitch of his eyelid that only I could see. But before I could react, my mother was there. She did not rush over to see if I was okay. She did not grab a towel to help me clean up. She marched over with a face twisted in fury, and she turned that fury directly on me. "Zara!" she shrieked, grabbing my arm and yanking me slightly. "What is wrong with you? Why do you have to be so clumsy? You tripped him." I stared at her in disbelief. "I was sitting down, Mom. He threw it on me." "Do not lie," Patricia hissed, looking around apologetically at the guests. "I saw you stick your leg out. You are trying to ruin this night because you are jealous. Look at this mess. Look at your dress. You look like a disaster." She turned to Julian, her voice softening into a coo. "Oh, Julian, sweetie, are you okay? Did any get on your tuxedo?" "I am fine, Patricia," Julian said, sighing dramatically. "I just feel bad. I know Zara is going through a lot. Maybe she has had a bit too much to drink herself." He leaned in close to me under the pretense of checking the stain on my shoulder. His lips brushed my ear and his voice dropped to that terrifying whisper again. "That is for the bathroom." He breathed the smell of alcohol heavy on his breath. "And that is a lesson. You are dirty, you are stained, and no one is going to listen to a woman who looks like she just crawled out of a gutter. Know your place, Zara." He pulled back, flashing a sympathetic smile to the room. "I will get someone to bring some club soda," he announced loudly. Something inside me snapped. It was not a loud snap. It was the quiet sound of a bridge burning. The last bridge that connected me to the hope that this family could be saved. I looked at the red stain spreading across my chest. It ruined the dress. It ruined the illusion. But it clarified everything. I did not wipe the wine away. I did not cry. I stood up slowly. The chair scraped against the floor, a harsh sound that made Uncle Ray flinch. I looked at my mother, who was fussing over Julian's spotless sleeve. I looked at Julian, who was smirking at his victory. I picked up my phone from the table. The screen was still glowing. I unlocked it and opened the message thread with Sterling, the CEO of my parent company. I did not hesitate. My thumbs flew across the screen. Code red. "He is at the venue. Bring the team. Execute the takeover. Now." I hit send. I looked at Julian one last time. He thought he had just stained a dress. He did not know he had just signed his own arrest warrant. "Do not bother with the club soda, Julian," I said, my voice cutting through the laughter like a blade. "You are going to need it to clean up the mess you are about to be in." I sat back down, folded my arms over the stain, and waited for the doors to open. The time for mercy was over. The time for the CEO had arrived. The spotlight shifted away from my stained dress and cut through the darkness to illuminate the main stage where my father, Robert Brooks, was standing. He adjusted the microphone with the confident air of a man who believed he was the architect of his own fortune, rather than a beneficiary of lucky market trends. He looked distinguished in his tuxedo, the very picture of a proud patriarch, and for a fleeting second, I felt a pang of the old childish desire to have him look at me with pride instead of pity. That feeling evaporated the moment he began to speak. My father cleared his throat and smiled at the crowd, a practiced expression that did not quite reach his eyes. "Friends and family," he began, his voice booming through the high-quality speakers I had paid for during the renovation. "We gather here tonight to celebrate not just a union of two hearts, but the union of two great families. When I look at Bianca and Julian, I see the future. I see ambition. I see the kind of drive that built this country. He paused for applause and the room obliged. I sat still, my hands folded over the drying wine stain on my chest, watching him like a judge, watching a defendant perjure himself. Raising children is a gamble. My father continued, his tone shifting into something more somber, something theatrically heavy. You invest your love, your time, and your resources. You hope that they will all grow into strong, capable trees that bear fruit. But as any gardener knows, not every seed takes root. Some wither. Some refuse to grow straight, no matter how many supports you put in place. The silence in the room was deafening. He did not say my name. He did not have to. Every head at the nearby tables turned slightly to glance at the dark corner where table 19 sat. I felt the weight of hundreds of eyes, but I did not look down. I looked straight at my father. He was publicly disowning my potential, rewriting my history to fit his narrative of the long-suffering father dealing with a wayward child. Bianca, however, has never disappointed me, he said, turning to smile at my sister, who was dabbing at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. She understands the value of image. She understands that to succeed you must align yourself with success. She chose Julian, a man of industry, a man who knows the value of $1. I almost laughed out loud. Julian knew the value of $1 so well he had to steal 200,000 of them from my company to pay for the ring on Bianca's finger. The irony was so rich, it was practically choking me. My father took a deep breath, preparing for his grand finale. Because of this, because I want to ensure that the Brooks legacy is carried forward by those who truly appreciate it, your mother and I have made a decision. We have decided that the family estate on Oak Creek, the home where we raised our children, will not be divided. I stiffened. The Oak Creek house was not just a building. It was where my grandmother had taught me to read. It was the only place I had ever felt safe. It was supposed to be left to me and Bianca equally as outlined in my grandfather's original wishes before he passed, though he had foolishly left the execution of the trust to my father. We are transferring the deed to the Oak Creek estate to Bianca and Julian effective immediately. My father announced, his voice swelling with self-importance. It will be their first home. A home for winners. A home for those who make us proud. The room erupted in applause. Bianca squealed and threw her arms around Julian's neck. My mother was beaming, clapping her hands together as if she had just witnessed a miracle. I sat there, hollowed out. He was giving away my childhood home to a thief and a bully. He was stripping me of my birthright in front of 300 people to reward a man who was currently under investigation for felony embezzlement. The pain of the rejection was sharp, but it was quickly replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. My father had just played his last card. He thought he held the power because he held the deed to a house. He did not realize that I held the deed to his reality. I looked down at my phone. The screen was dark, but the machinery of justice I had set in motion was humming silently in the background. He wanted to talk about winners and losers. He wanted to talk about investments. He had just bet everything on a horse that was about to break its leg. I watched Julian whisper something to Bianca, likely calculating how much he could sell the house for once the wedding was over. I picked up my fork and slowly, deliberately pierced the cold piece of chicken on my plate. Let them have the house, I thought. By the time I am done with them tonight, they will be lucky if they can afford a tent. The speech was over, but my rebuttal was just beginning. My father's generous offer of the family estate was a hard act to follow, but Julian Huntington was not a man who liked to be outdone. He waited for the applause to die down, allowing the silence to build until every eye was fixed on him once again. He stepped down from the dais and walked over to Bianca, taking her hand with the reverence of a prince, claiming his princess in a fairy tale. He brought the microphone to his lips, and his voice dropped to a smooth, intimate baritone that was clearly rehearsed for maximum emotional impact. Bianca, he said, looking deep into her eyes, while ensuring his profile was perfectly angled for the cameras. "Your father has given us a foundation, a home, but I want to give you something else. I want to give you freedom. I want to give you speed. I want to give you something that shines almost as brightly as you do." He gestured dramatically toward the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the hotel's circular driveway. At his signal, the valet team, the same team that had sneered at my Honda Civic earlier, pulled a silk tarp off a vehicle parked directly under the spotlights. The room gasped as one. Sitting there gleaming under the street lamps was a brand-new Porsche 911 Carrera in a pearlescent white that matched the wedding theme perfectly. A massive red velvet bow was perched on the hood, its ribbons cascading down the sleek curves of the fender. It was a machine of pure vanity, aggressive and beautiful, and obscenely expensive. "Oh my God," Bianca screamed, her hands flying to her mouth. She looked like she was about to faint. She turned to the crowd, her face flushed with triumph. "Look at it! Look what he got me!" The room erupted. Men were whistling, clapping Julian on the back. Women were sighing with envy, whispering to their husbands about why they never received gifts like that. My mother was practically hyperventilating with joy, clutching my father's arm as if she had just won the lottery herself. "He is a keeper," someone at the table next to me shouted. "That is a $150,000 car right there." I sat perfectly still, staring out the window at the vehicle. But I was not looking at the red bow or the shiny paint. I was looking at the license plate frame. It was a temporary dealer tag, but I recognized the dealership. It was the exclusive partner for Ventura Holdings' corporate fleet. And then as I squinted through the glass, I saw something that made my blood run cold and hot at the same time. On the passenger side window, there was a small white barcode sticker that the dealership used for inventory tracking. I unlocked my phone and opened the attachment David had sent me 5 minutes ago. It was a list of assets purchased by the marketing division in the last quarter under the guise of promotional raffle prizes. I scrolled down. There it was. Porsche 911 Carrera. Pearl white. VIN ending in 492. Status company property. Assigned to marketing promotional pool. Julian had not bought the car. He had essentially checked it out of the company library, slapped a bow on it, and gifted it to my sister. He was giving her a stolen car. He was gifting her a felony. The audacity was staggering. He was so confident that no one from corporate would ever audit a regional marketing director that he had turned a company asset into a personal engagement present. He was standing there soaking up the adoration, acting like a benevolent billionaire, when in reality he was just a thief with a very high credit limit on a corporate card that I paid the bill for. Bianca was now banging on the glass, blowing kisses to the car. Julian wrapped his arms around her waist, whispering in her ear, probably telling her how much she deserved it. The guests were eating it up. They saw a power couple. They saw true love expressed through horsepower. I looked at Uncle Ray, who was staring at the car with a mixture of awe and sadness. He was losing his house because Julian squeezed him for pennies while Julian was throwing around 6-figure cars like they were toys. The injustice was so thick it tasted metallic. "It is beautiful, isn't it, Zara?" a voice sneered from behind me. It was Courtney, Julian's sister. She had come over to twist the knife. "Too bad you will never experience a man loving you that much. Maybe if you work hard, Bianca will let you wash it on weekends." I turned to look at her. She expected me to be jealous. She expected me to be crying into my napkin. Instead, I gave her a smile that did not reach my eyes. A smile that was sharp enough to cut. "It is a very distinct car, Courtney," I said calmly. "White stands out. It makes it very easy for the police to identify." Courtney frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" "You are just bitter." I turned back to the window. Bianca had turned away from the glass and thrown her arms around Julian's neck, sobbing dramatically into his shoulder. "I love you," she wailed, her voice amplified by the microphone he was still holding. "I love you the most in the world. You are the best man I have ever known." The crowd cheered again. I watched the best man she had ever known smirk over her shoulder. He looked at me again, raising his eyebrows in a challenge. He thought he had checkmated me. He thought the car was the ultimate symbol of his victory. I looked down at my phone. The audit report was fully downloaded. The evidence was irrefutable. "Enjoy the car, Bianca," I whispered to myself. "Because in about 20 minutes, it is going to be towed back to the company lot. And Julian is going to be riding in the back of a very different kind of vehicle." The celebration was at its peak, which meant it was the perfect time for the fall. The applause for the stolen white Porsche finally began to fade, settling into a low, admiring murmur that filled the ballroom like a thick fog. The guests were still craning their necks to get a better look at the vehicle, whispering about horsepower and sticker prices, completely mesmerized by the flash of wealth Julian had just dazzled them with. It was the hardest act in the world to follow, but it was my turn. The schedule of events printed on thick cardstock that I had paid for dictated that the maid of honor's gift presentation came immediately after the groom's surprise. The timing was deliberate, designed by my mother to highlight the disparity between Julian's limitless success and my perceived mediocrity. I stood up from table 19. My legs felt heavy, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of the irony I was carrying. I picked up the small, plain white envelope that had been sitting next to my cold soup. It did not have a bow. It was not wrapped in silk. Inside was a government savings bond I had purchased during my sophomore year of college. Back then, $500 was not just money. It was 3 months of skipping meals. It was walking 5 miles to campus in the snow because I could not afford the bus fare. It was the only safety net I had when my parents cut me off to pay for Bianca's modeling portfolio. I had saved it for 10 years, intending to give it to her when she started her own life, a symbol of stability and hard work. I walked toward the stage. The silence that fell over the room was not respectful, it was awkward. The guests looked from the gleaming car outside the window to the woman in the stained navy dress walking toward the microphone. I could feel their pity radiating in waves, hot and suffocating. I stepped onto the dais. Bianca was still clinging to Julian, her face flushed with greed and excitement. When she saw me, her smile faltered. She looked at the thin envelope in my hand and then rolled her eyes, making sure her friends in the front row saw her annoyance. "This is for you, Bianca," I said, my voice steady despite the lack of amplification. "I know it is not a car, but it is something real." Bianca snatched the envelope from my hand with 2 fingers as if it were contaminated. She ripped it open with zero ceremony, tearing the edge of the paper inside. She pulled out the bond, her eyes scanning the faded text. She frowned, confused at first, and then she let out a short, sharp laugh of disbelief. "A savings bond?" she asked, holding it up for the room to see, as if it were a dirty tissue. She squinted at the numbers. $500. She looked at me, her mouth twisting into a sneer. "Zara, are you serious? $500? That does not even cover the cost of the champagne you just drank. You are giving me $500 after Julian just gave me a Porsche?" I stood my ground. "That is money I saved when I had nothing, Bianca. It will mature in 5 years. It is an investment." Bianca laughed again, louder this time. "An investment. Honey, this is pocket change. I cannot even buy a replacement tire for my new car with this. This is embarrassing. I mean, I knew you were struggling, but I didn't know you were this desperate. Did you find this in a drawer somewhere?" She tossed the bond onto the table behind her, where it landed next to an empty wine glass, discarded and worthless in her eyes. The room was silent, holding its collective breath, waiting to see if I would cry. That is when Julian stepped in. He did not defend me. He did what he did best. He patronized me to elevate himself. He wrapped an arm around Bianca's waist and took the microphone, his face arranging itself into a mask of exaggerated sympathy. Now, Bianca babe, be nice." Julian cooed, his voice booming through the speakers. We have to remember that not everyone has been as fortunate as we have. Zara is doing her best." He turned to look at me, flashing a pitying smile that made my skin crawl. "Thank you, Zara. Really. We appreciate the gesture. We know that $500 is a lot of money for someone in your financial situation. It is the thought that counts, right, folks?" He gestured to the crowd, inviting them to join in his benevolence. And they did. A ripple of laughter went through the room, followed by a smattering of polite, condescending applause. It was the sound of 300 people agreeing that I was a charity case. They were applauding my poverty. They were applauding Julian's grace in dealing with the poor relation. I looked at the crowd. I saw my mother shaking her head, mouthing the word sorry to the people at her table. I saw my father looking down at his shoes. I saw the waiters looking away, unable to watch the humiliation. But I did not look down. I looked straight at Julian. He thought he was saving the moment. He thought he was being the bigger man. He had no idea that the $500 I had just given Bianca was the only clean money she would touch all night. The car outside was stolen property. The ring on her finger was evidence in a felony investigation. The food they were eating was paid for with kickbacks. My $500 was the only thing on that stage that wasn't built on a lie. I watched Julian squeeze Bianca's shoulder, whispering something that made her giggle. They looked like the perfect couple standing on top of the world. But I knew the truth. I knew that in less than an hour that bond would be the only asset Bianca had left to her name. I stepped back from the microphone, leaving the envelope where she had tossed it. The laughter of the crowd washed over me, but it did not sting anymore. It just felt like background noise. I was done trying to be a sister. I was done trying to be a daughter. I was just the CEO now, and the CEO had seen enough. I turned and walked off the stage, my head high, listening to the sound of my own footsteps on the wood, counting down the seconds until the real show began. The audit team was outside. The police were on their way. And the man laughing into the microphone was about to find out exactly what $500 of honest money was actually worth compared to a lifetime of fraud. I stepped off the stage, and the silence that followed me was heavier than the applause that had greeted the stolen Porsche. The air in the ballroom felt thick, charged with the collective judgment of 300 people who had just decided that I was not a victim of circumstance, but a deliberate saboteur of joy. I kept my head high, clutching my empty purse, intending to return to my exile at table 19 to wait for the inevitable explosion of truth. But I never made it that far. My mother Patricia intercepted me near the chocolate fountain. She did not look like the woman who had once bandaged my skinned knees. She looked like a political handler dealing with a scandal. Her hand shot out and clamped around my upper arm, her fingers digging into the flesh with a force that would undoubtedly leave bruises by morning. She did not scream. Screaming would have drawn attention. Instead, she dragged me physically toward the side exit, her heels clicking aggressively on the marble floor. She pulled me into the alcove where the waitstaff stacked dirty dishes, a space that smelled of stale coffee and resentment. "You have done enough," she hissed, her face inches from mine. Her eyes were wide and manic, the pupils dilated with rage. "Is this what you wanted, Zara? Did you want to humiliate your sister on the most important night of her life? Did you want to show everyone that you are bitter and cheap?" I looked at her, feeling a strange sense of detachment. I gave her what I had. "Mom, that bond was real money. It was clean money. Unlike the car parked outside. Do not speak to me about money," she spat, shaking me slightly. "You embarrassed us. You embarrassed Julian. Did you see the look on the Huntingtons' faces? They think we are trash because of you. They think we raised a failure. I cannot have you here anymore. I cannot look at you standing there with that stain on your dress and that smug look on your face while my family tries to celebrate success." She took a deep breath, smoothing the front of her silver gown, as if wiping away the contamination of my presence. "I want you to go, Zara. Leave. Right now. Get in your rusted car and drive away. I do not want to see your face for the rest of the night." In fact, I do not want to see you until you can learn to respect your place in this family." The words hung in the air between us, sharp and final. She was kicking me out. She was evicting her own daughter from a party that was taking place in a building that her daughter owned. The irony was so potent it almost made me dizzy. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized that there was no love left in her eyes. There was only calculation and vanity. She was cutting off a limb to save the outfit. I pulled my arm from her grip, straightening my spine. I looked around the opulent ballroom at the chandeliers I had chosen, at the velvet drapes I had approved, at the staff who were currently terrified of me. "Mom," I asked, my voice deadly calm, "are you sure you want to do this? Are you sure you want to kick me out of this hotel? Think very carefully about your answer." She laughed, a harsh barking sound. "Am I sure? I have never been more sure of anything. This hotel is for guests, Zara, not for jealous little girls who try to ruin everything. You are trespassing on my happiness. Get out." She raised her hand and signaled to a security guard standing near the emergency exit. He was a new hire, a young man named Officer Miller, who had started last week. I recognized him from the personnel files, but he had never seen me. He saw a wealthy woman in a silver gown pointing at a woman in a stained dress, and he made the logical assumption about who held the power. He walked over, his hand resting on his belt, his face set in a mask of professional intimidation. "Is there a problem here, Mrs. Brooks?" he asked, deferring entirely to my mother. "Yes, there is," Patricia said, pointing a manicured finger at my chest. "This woman is causing a disturbance. She is harassing the guests and refusing to leave. Please escort her off the property immediately." Officer Miller turned to me. He loomed over me, using his height to intimidate. "Ma'am, I am going to have to ask you to come with me. We do not want any trouble." He reached out and placed a heavy hand on my shoulder to guide me toward the door. The physical contact was the final straw. It was a violation of protocol, a violation of my person, and the catalyst for the end of the world as they knew it. I did not resist. I did not scream. I looked at my mother one last time. She was smiling triumphantly, thinking she had finally disposed of the problem. She had no idea she had just thrown the match into the powder keg. I looked at Officer Miller. "Do not touch me," I said quietly. He tightened his grip. "Let's go, ma'am. Do not make this hard." I let him push me one step toward the door. Just one step. Because at that exact moment the double doors at the main entrance crashed open with a sound like thunder. The music stopped, the chatter died, and the atmosphere in the room shifted from a party to a judgment day. My mother looked up, annoyed that someone was interrupting her victory lap. She did not know that the people walking through those doors were not guests. They were the executioners she had been warned about, and they were looking for me. The heavy hand of Officer Miller was still clamped firmly on my shoulder, and he had just begun to shove me toward the service exit when the atmosphere in the ballroom shattered. It did not break because of a scream or a dropped glass. It broke because the massive double mahogany doors at the main entrance doors that were usually opened only by white-gloved doormen for royalty were thrown open with a force that vibrated through the floorboards. The sound was like a thunderclap inside a library. The string quartet stopped playing mid-measure, their bows freezing in the air. The chatter of 300 guests died instantly, replaced by a silence so sudden and so absolute that I could hear the hum of the crystal chandeliers overhead. Officer Miller hesitated, his grip loosening slightly as he turned his head toward the noise. My mother stopped her triumphant gloating, her mouth hanging open in an unseemly gape. Everyone turned to look at the entrance. Framed in the doorway, silhouetted against the bright lights of the lobby, was a phalanx of men. They were not guests. They were not staff. They were a wall of dark, expensive wool suits, moving with a synchronized precision that suggested military training. At the center of the formation walked a man whose face had graced the cover of Forbes magazine 3 times in the last decade. He was tall, silver-haired, and radiated the kind of terrifying authority that could curdle milk. It was Arthur Sterling, the public-facing CEO of Ventura Holdings. To the world, he was the titan of industry. To Julian, he was a distant deity, the man who signed the checks that Julian was currently stealing from. To me, he was Arthur, the man I had hired 5 years ago to be the face of my empire, so I could work in peace. He walked into the room not like a guest, but like an invasion force. He was flanked by 4 men carrying metallic briefcases and 2 uniformed police officers who stayed a few steps behind. The sight was jarring. This was a wedding engagement, a celebration of love and excess, and suddenly, it looked like a crime scene investigation. I watched Julian's reaction carefully. For a split second, I saw confusion flicker across his face. He looked at the police, then at the briefcases. But then his narcissism overrode his survival instinct. His brain did a frantic calculation and landed on the only conclusion his ego would allow. He thought they were here for him. He thought that somehow word of his lavish party and his genius had reached the upper echelons of corporate, and the CEO himself had flown in to congratulate the rising star. The transformation was immediate. Julian straightened his spine, buttoned his tuxedo jacket, and plastered a wide, obsequious smile on his face. He actually puffed out his chest. He looked at the crowd, then at Bianca, silently screaming at everyone to witness his importance. See, his eyes seemed to say, "Even the CEO worships me." He stepped away from Bianca, leaving her standing alone by the chocolate fountain, and practically jogged across the dance floor toward the approaching group. He extended his arms wide as if greeting an old friend he hadn't seen in years. "Mr. Sterling." Julian shouted, his voice cracking slightly with excitement. "Oh my goodness, what a surprise, what an absolute honor." He reached the group just as they passed the halfway mark of the room. He stopped in front of Arthur Sterling, ignoring the grim expressions of the men surrounding him. He ignored the police officers. He ignored the tension that was making the air thin. "I cannot believe you flew all the way out here for my engagement," Julian gushed, extending his hand for a handshake that was destined to remain unreciprocated. "This is incredible. Truly. I was just telling my fiancé that Ventura Holdings is more than a company, it is a family. And seeing you here just proves it. Please come in. Let me get you a drink. We have the finest scotch on the house, of course." Julian laughed at his own joke, a nervous, high-pitched sound that echoed awkwardly in the silent room. He turned to the crowd, waving his hand to gesture at Sterling. "Everyone, please give a round of applause for Mr. Arthur Sterling, the CEO of Ventura Holdings, and my personal mentor." There was a smattering of confused applause, mostly from people who were too terrified not to clap. But Sterling did not smile. He did not wave. He did not shake Julian's hand. He stopped walking and looked at Julian with an expression of cold, clinical distaste, as if he had just stepped in something unpleasant on the sidewalk. Julian's smile faltered. He left his hand hanging in the air, waiting for the validation that was never going to come. He did not know that the man he was calling his mentor had spent the last hour on a private jet reading a dossier about Julian's theft. He did not know that the briefcases behind him did not contain gifts but indictments. I stood by the service exit, rubbing my arm where the guard had grabbed me. I watched the scene unfold with a sense of grim satisfaction. Julian was dancing on the edge of a cliff, and he had just invited the wind to push him over. The music had stopped, but the requiem was just beginning. Julian stopped just inches from Arthur Sterling, with his arms wide open and a smile so stretched it looked painful. He was vibrating with the kind of manic energy that comes from thinking you have just won the lottery, while the winning ticket is actually burning a hole in your pocket. The room was deathly silent, every guest straining to hear the interaction, and Julian took that silence as his cue to perform. He turned slightly so his profile was best caught by the event photographer who was frantically snapping photos of the encounter. "Ladies and gentlemen," Julian announced, his voice booming without the microphone now cutting through the tension like a dull knife. "I am beyond humbled. Truly. I told you all that Ventura Holdings was a family, but I did not expect the patriarch himself to grace us with his presence. This man right here is not just my boss. He is my mentor. He is the visionary who took me under his wing when I was just a junior associate and taught me everything I know about business ethics and leadership. We are practically brothers." He finished his speech and thrust his hand forward, waiting for the firm, validating handshake that would seal his status as the heir apparent to the corporate throne. He stood there for 1 second, then 2, then 5. The hand remained suspended in the air, unshakable and ignored. Arthur Sterling did not move a muscle. He did not smile. He did not blink. He looked at Julian's outstretched hand with the same detached curiosity one might have for a dead fish washing up on a beach. The silence stretched into agony. Guests began to shift in their seats. My mother, who had been beaming seconds ago, felt the color drain from her face. She sensed something was wrong before Julian did. Julian, however, was trapped in his own delusion. He let out a nervous chuckle and pulled his hand back, wiping his sweaty palm on his trousers. "He is all business, folks," Julian joked to the crowd, his voice cracking slightly. "Always in the zone. That is why he is the best. Mr. Sterling, please come have a drink. I want to introduce you to my fiancée Bianca. She is wearing the ring that, well, the ring that represents all our hard work." Sterling finally spoke. His voice was low, deep, and carried the kind of authority that made the crystal glasses on the tables seem to vibrate. He did not address the crowd. He did not address Bianca. He looked directly at Julian, his eyes cold and hard as flint. "I am not here for a drink, Julian, and I am certainly not here to meet your fiancé." Julian blinked, his smile faltering for the first time. "Oh, of course, urgent business. I understand. Is it the merger I have some ideas on that if you want to Sterling cut him off? I am here because I received a code red alert regarding a security threat against the owner of this company. I was told that the chairwoman is being harassed on her own property. I was told that someone is attempting to remove her from the premises." A wave of confusion washed over Julian's face. He looked around the room, genuinely baffled. Chairwoman harassment. His mind could not connect the dots because the picture was too big for his narrow worldview. He assumed Sterling was talking about some dignitary, some VIP guest he had missed. "Oh," Julian said, letting out a breath of relief. "There must be a misunderstanding, sir. There is no chairwoman here. Just family and friends. The only disturbance we have had all night is, well, it is a minor domestic issue." He turned and pointed a finger directly at me. I was still standing by the service exit, the security guard's hand hovering uncertainly near my arm. I looked like a wreck. My dress was stained with red wine. My hair was slightly askew from my mother dragging me. I looked exactly like what Julian wanted me to be, a mess. "It is just my sister-in-law," Julian explained, his tone dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was still loud enough for me to hear. "She is a bit unstable. Jealousy is an ugly thing, you know. She came here looking like a beggar, insulted the guests, and tried to ruin the evening. She was just leaving. My security team is escorting her out to the trash compactor where she belongs. You do not need to worry about her, Mr. Sterling. She is nobody, just a glitch in the evening." Julian laughed again, expecting Sterling to share in the dismissal. He thought he was bonding. He thought he was showing his boss that he could handle personnel issues. Sterling looked at Julian. Then he looked at the finger pointing at me. Then he looked at me. For the first time since entering the room, the ice in his eyes melted, replaced by a flash of intense burning fury. But he did not scream. He did something much worse. He started walking. He did not walk toward the bar. He did not walk toward the stage. He walked straight toward me. Julian stood frozen as Sterling brushed past him. The movement was so dismissive it was almost violent. The wind from Sterling's expensive trench coat hit Julian in the face, a physical manifestation of his irrelevance. Julian spun around, watching in horror. Sir Julian called out, his voice trembling. "Sir, where are you going? The exit is that way. That is just the service area. You do not want to go over there. It smells like—" Sterling ignored him. He marched across the marble floor, his entourage of lawyers and police officers following in his wake like a dark tide. The guests parted like the Red Sea, shrinking back from the intensity of the group. As Sterling approached me, Officer Miller, the young security guard, panicked. He realized too late that he was holding on to the wrong person. He snatched his hand away from my shoulder as if I were made of burning coal, and took 3 large steps back, flattening himself against the wall. I stood there, rubbing my arm, waiting. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I just waited for the inevitable. Arthur Sterling stopped 3 feet in front of me. He looked at the wine stain on my dress. He looked at the cheap tote bag near my feet. He looked at the tears I had refused to shed that were glistening in my eyes. The entire room held its breath. My mother was clutching her throat. Bianca was gripping the edge of the chocolate fountain table. Julian was standing in the middle of the dance floor, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Then Arthur Sterling, the man who controlled billions of dollars in assets, the man Julian Huntington claimed was his brother, did the unthinkable. He brought his heels together with a sharp click. He straightened his back. And then slowly, deliberately, he bent at the waist. He bowed. It was not a nod. It was a full 90-degree bow of absolute deference and respect. He held the position for 3 long seconds, his eyes fixed on the floor at my feet, humbling himself before the stained, humiliated woman in the navy dress. "Good evening, Madame Chairwoman," Sterling said, his voice ringing out in the silence, clear and respectful. "I apologize for the delay, and I apologize deeply that we allowed the staff to treat you with such disrespect. We are ready to execute your orders." He straightened up and looked at me, waiting for a command. Behind him, the lawyers opened their briefcases. The police officers placed their hands on their holsters, and in the center of the room, Julian Huntington's knees finally gave out. Arthur Sterling straightened his posture, looking down at Julian with the kind of disinterest usually reserved for a stain on a carpet, before turning his attention back to me. His voice rang out clear and authoritative, cutting through the stunned silence of the ballroom like a gavel striking a sounding board. "Madam Chairwoman, the forensic audit you requested has been completed. The legal team has prepared the presentation as per your instructions. We are ready to proceed at your command." The words "Madam Chairwoman" hung in the air, sucking the oxygen out of the room. I saw my mother's mouth open and close, no sound coming out, as her brain tried and failed to process the reality that the daughter she had just tried to evict was the boss of the man she was trying to impress. I saw Bianca freeze her hand halfway to her mouth, the smile sliding off her face like melting wax. And I saw Julian, still on his knees, look up with eyes wide with terror, the blood draining from his face until he looked like a ghost. I did not smile. I did not offer a comforting glance. I simply nodded at Sterling. I reached out and gently removed Officer Miller's hand from my arm. The young guard looked like he was about to vomit. He snatched his hand back as if he had been burned, stumbling over his own feet to get away from me. I smoothed the fabric of my dress, the wine stain still wet and cold against my skin, but it no longer felt like a mark of shame. It felt like war paint. I walked past my mother without looking at her. I walked past my father, who was gripping the back of a chair for support. I walked past the table where the Huntingtons were huddled, their faces pale and fearful. I climbed the stairs to the stage, the heavy thud of my heels echoing in the silence. I took the microphone from the stand where Julian had left it. It was still warm from his hand. I looked at the projection booth in the back of the room. "Execute," I said simply. The massive screen behind me, which was supposed to display a montage of Julian and Bianca's romantic vacation photos, flickered to life. But instead of sunsets and beaches, a high-resolution corporate organizational chart appeared. At the very top, in a box larger than all the others, was the name Zara Brooks. Directly below it, connected by a solid black line, was the position of CEO, occupied by Arthur Sterling. Far, far below that, buried under 4 layers of middle management, was the position of Regional Marketing Director, occupied by Julian Huntington. A collective gasp ripped through the room. It was the sound of 300 people realizing they had bet on the wrong horse. I watched my mother stare at the screen, reading the text over and over again, her world crumbling in real time. Slide 2, I commanded. The image changed. This time it was a bank statement. It was the ledger for the Ventura Holdings Eastern Division Marketing Fund. Certain lines were highlighted in bright red. They showed transfers totaling $250,000 to a shell company called Huntington Consulting. Beside that was an invoice for a 2-carat diamond ring billed to that same shell company. The murmurs in the room turned into shocked whispers. I looked down at Julian. He was shaking his head frantically, mouthing the word "no" over and over again. Slide 3, I said, my voice rising slightly. The final image appeared. It was a vehicle purchase order. It showed a Porsche 911 Carrera Pearl White 5IN, ending in 492. The billing address was Ventura Holdings Corporate Fleet. The status was listed as company property, not for personal use. I turned back to the audience. I looked at the faces of the people who had laughed at my $500 bond. I looked at the people who had cheered for the stolen car. Then I looked down at Julian. He was trying to stand up, his legs wobbling beneath him. I raised the microphone to my lips. Julian, I said, my voice calm and deadly. You told me in the hallway that I would never understand how rich people make money. You said I was just a gnat. You were right about one thing. I do not understand how you make money, because I do not steal. I took a step closer to the edge of the stage, looming over him. But you were wrong about the rest. I am not a gnat. I am the owner of the company that signs your paycheck. I am the owner of the car you just gave my sister. And I am the owner of the hotel you are standing in. You wanted to teach me a lesson about power. Consider this your masterclass. You are fired, and you are under arrest. I looked down at Julian from the edge of the stage, and for the first time in my life, I did not see the golden boy, or the marketing genius, or the perfect fiancé. I saw a man who was rapidly disintegrating under the weight of his own lies. The silence in the ballroom was so profound that I could hear the hum of the projector cooling fan behind me. Everyone was waiting for him to offer a defense, to laugh it off, to explain that this was all some terrible administrative error. But the evidence looming on the screen behind me, the bank routing numbers, the dates, the signatures, was as solid as the marble floor beneath his trembling knees. Julian, I said, my voice projecting clearly without a hint of emotion. Let us be very clear about what is happening here. This is not a misunderstanding. This is a felony. I have spent the last hour reviewing the forensic audit of your department. You did not just pad an expense account. You created a systematic siphon to drain resources from the company to build a facade of wealth for yourself. I turned slightly to address the head table where his parents were sitting. Meredith Huntington, the woman who had mocked my dress and my bank account mere minutes ago, was gripping the tablecloth so hard her knuckles were white. Her face was a mask of pure horror. Meredith, I continued, keeping my tone conversational yet lethal. You asked me earlier if my family could afford your high standards. Now I have the answer. You cannot even afford your own standards. That necklace you are wearing, the one you touched while you called me cheap, I checked the receipts. It was purchased using a corporate credit card issued to Julian for client gifts. That is stolen property. You are wearing evidence. Meredith let out a strangled gasp. Her hand flew to her throat, clutching the diamonds as if they were burning her skin. She looked at her husband, then at her son, and realized that her social standing had just evaporated. The shame was too much for her constitution. She swayed in her seat, her eyes rolling back in her head, and then slumped sideways in a dead faint. It was a theatrical exit, perfectly on brand, but nobody moved to help her. They were too captivated by the disaster unfolding on the floor. I turned my attention back to Julian. He was sweating profusely now, the moisture beading on his forehead and ruining his expensive spray tan. He tried to speak, but his voice was a high-pitched squeak. "Zara, please," he stammered, holding his hands up in a surrender motion. "It was a loan. I was going to pay it back. I have a bonus coming up next quarter. We can fix this. We are family. You cannot do this to family." I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Family. You called me a gnat an hour ago. You told me I was trash. Now that I hold the gavel, suddenly, we are family." "No, Julian, we are not family. We are employer and employee. And as your employer, I have some bad news." I signaled to the legal team standing by the door. "You are terminated effective immediately for cause," I announced. "Your access to all company accounts has been revoked. Your security clearance is cancelled, and you will be hearing from our legal department regarding the restitution of the $250,000 you stole." I pointed a finger toward the window where the white Porsche was gleaming under the lights. "And that car? The one you used to buy my sister's affection. That is a company fleet vehicle designated for executive transport. You stole it from the lot this afternoon. It is being repossessed as we speak." As if on cue, a tow truck with flashing amber lights pulled into the driveway visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The driver hopped out and began hooking up the Porsche. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the symbol of Julian's success was literally dragged away. Bianca let out a sob, but it was drowned out by the sound of heavy boots marching across the dance floor. Two police officers who had been waiting patiently in the shadows near Arthur Sterling stepped forward. They did not look like they were there to celebrate. One of them pulled a pair of metal handcuffs from his belt. The sound of the ratchet clicking as he tested them was sharp and final. "Julian Huntington," the officer said, his voice bored and professional. "You are under arrest for grand larceny, wire fraud, and embezzlement. You have the right to remain silent." Julian looked at the officers, then at the crowd, then at me. His eyes were wild. "This cannot be happening," he whispered. "I am a vice president." "Not anymore," I said coldly. "Now you are just a defendant." The officer grabbed Julian's arm and spun him around. Julian offered no resistance. He was broken. As the cold steel cuffs clicked around his wrists, he looked small. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the pathetic reality of a man who had tried to build a castle on a swamp. My parents watched in paralyzed silence. My father, who had just given a speech about pride and legacy, looked like he had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. He watched the man he had championed, the man he had chosen over his own daughter, get treated like a common criminal. He looked at me standing on the stage with the power to command police and CEOs, and I saw the crushing weight of regret settle onto his shoulders. But it was too late for apologies. "Take him away," I said to the officers. "And please use the front door. I want everyone to see exactly what happens when you steal from me." As they dragged Julian out, he did not scream or fight. He just hung his head, sobbing quietly, his tuxedo rumpled and his reputation destroyed. I watched him go, feeling a sense of absolute finality. I had not just fired an employee, I had exorcised a demon that had been haunting my family for years. The golden boy was gone, leaving behind only tarnished brass and a pile of debts. The flashing blue lights of the police cruiser faded into the night, taking with them the man who had promised my family the world but delivered only a felony record. The ballroom remained in a state of suspended animation. The 300 guests who had been drinking my champagne and laughing at my expense were now watching me with a mixture of terror and awe. They knew that the ground had shifted, and they were terrified of falling into the cracks. I stood alone on the stage, holding the microphone that felt like a scepter of judgment. I watched as the people who shared my DNA, the people who were supposed to be my safe harbor, navigated the debris of their shattered expectations to reach me. It was Bianca who reached me first. Her mascara was running in dark rivulets down her cheeks, ruining the professional makeup job she had spent 3 hours perfecting. She did not look like the arrogant golden child who had mocked my savings bond. She looked like a child who had dropped her ice cream cone. She scrambled up the stairs of the stage, heedless of her designer gown snagging on the edge. She reached for my hands, but I took a small, deliberate step back, keeping a physical distance that mirrored the emotional chasm between us. "Zara, please," she sobbed, her voice trembling with a hysteria that seemed only half feigned. "You have to believe me. I did not know. I swear on my life I did not know he was stealing. He told me he had a trust fund. He told me the car was a bonus. I am a victim here too, Zara. He lied to me just like he lied to everyone else. We are sisters, right? You cannot let me go down for this. You have to help me." She looked at me with pleading eyes, waiting for me to step into my old role. The role of the fixer, the role of the big sister who cleans up the mess and takes the blame. But that version of Zara had died the moment she threw the bond on the table. Before I could answer, my father Robert climbed onto the stage. He looked older than he had 10 minutes ago. His posture, usually so rigid with pride, was slumped. He tried to muster a smile, but it looked like a grimace of pain. He placed a hand on his chest, trying to summon the paternal authority he had abdicated years ago. "Zara, sweetheart," he began, his voice shaking. That was incredible. I mean, truly incredible. I always knew you were destined for great things. I told your mother just last week that you were a late bloomer, but when you bloomed you would outshine us all. You saved this family tonight. You saved us from a criminal. I am so proud of you." He reached out to pat my shoulder, the same shoulder he had watched my mother bruise earlier without saying a word. I looked at his hand, then I looked at his face. The audacity was breathtaking. He was trying to rewrite history, while the ink on his previous speech was still wet. And then, there was my mother. Patricia stood at the bottom of the stairs looking up at me. She was not crying. She looked shell-shocked. She was calculating the social fallout, realizing that her status as the mother of the bride had just been replaced by the mother of the fraud victim. But when she saw me looking at her, she tried to salvage the wreckage. "We can fix this, Zara," she called out, her voice shrill. "We can explain it to the guests. We can say you were working undercover. We can say this was all part of a plan to expose him. You are the hero now. Come down here. Let us take a family picture. We need to show a united front." I looked at them. My sister, the gold digger who claimed ignorance. My father, the opportunist who claimed pride. My mother, the narcissist who claimed unity. They were not sorry for how they treated me. They were sorry they had been caught betting against the house when the house held all the cards. I raised the microphone to my lips one last time. My voice was soft, but in the silent room it sounded like a thunderclap. "Dad, 10 minutes ago you stood on this exact spot and told 300 people that I was a withered seed. You said I was a disappointment. You gave away my childhood home to a thief because you said he was a winner and I was a loser. Did you lie then? Or are you lying now?" My father stammered, his face turning a deep shade of crimson. I was just... Emotions were running high, Zara. You know I didn't mean it." I turned to Bianca. "And you? You laughed at the money I saved by starving myself in college. You called me desperate. You let your fiancé throw wine on me and you smiled. You are not a victim, Bianca. You are an accomplice to your own greed. You did not care where the money came from as long as it bought you things that sparkled." Bianca wailed, burying her face in her hands. I looked down at my mother. "And you, Mom, you told me I was trash. You told me to go through the service entrance because you didn't want the guests to see me. You told the security guard to throw me out." I pointed to the back of the room, where Officer Miller was standing trying to make himself invisible. "Officer Miller, come here, please." The young guard jumped, but he knew who signed his paycheck now. He marched through the crowd, pushing past the stunned guests, until he stood at the bottom of the stage. He looked up at me with absolute deference. "Yes, Madam Chairwoman." I looked at my family, the people who had broken me 1,000 times so they could feel whole. "Mom, you were right about one thing. This hotel is for guests. And guests who cause disturbances, who harass the ownership, and who lack basic dignity are not welcome here. I gestured to my parents and my sister. Officer Miller, please escort these 3 individuals off the premises immediately. My mother gasped, clutching her pearls. Zara, you cannot be serious. We are your parents. I looked at her with eyes as cold as the grave. No. You are the people who evicted me from my own family. Now I am returning the favor. And Mom, make sure they use the service entrance. I do not want them cluttering up the main lobby. Officer Miller stepped forward, his face set in stone. He gestured toward the kitchen doors, the same doors I had been forced to walk through an hour ago. Let's go, folks, he said, his voice brooking no argument. Move it. I watched as my father tried to protest, as Bianca screamed, and as my mother looked back at me, with a hatred that finally matched my indifference. They were marched through the crowd, a parade of shame, heading toward the garbage disposal area. I did not feel joy. I did not feel sadness. I felt the immense relief of a weight finally being lifted. I turned my back on them and looked at Arthur Sterling, who was waiting with the next set of papers. The trash had been taken out. Now it was time to get back to business. I turned my back on the service entrance, where my parents and sister were being ushered out like common trespassers, and walked toward the main lobby of the Grand Othello. The walk felt different this time. 3 hours ago, I had crept through these halls clutching a trash bag, trying to make myself invisible to the very people I employed. Now the hallways seemed to widen to accommodate me. The staff members I passed did not look through me. They stopped what they were doing and pressed their backs against the walls, lowering their heads in genuine respect. I did not need to demand it. I had earned it by showing them that I was not just a signer of checks, but a wielder of justice. I reached the massive revolving gold doors at the front entrance, the same doors my mother had forbidden me from using. I pushed through them, stepping out into the crisp night air. The humidity of the ballroom left me replaced by the clean, sharp scent of the ocean and the city. At the bottom of the stairs, the valet stand was a flurry of activity. Marcus, the head valet who had sneered at my Honda Civic earlier, was standing at attention. His face was pale, and beads of sweat were gathering on his forehead, despite the cool breeze. He had heard the news. Everyone had heard the news. Beside him, idling with a low purr that vibrated in my chest, was my personal Bentley Continental GT. It had been brought around from the private garage by my executive driver, who held the rear door open for me. Marcus stepped forward, his hands trembling slightly as he reached out to help me down the last step. I stopped and looked at him. I did not say a word. I just looked at his name tag, then at his eyes. He swallowed hard, terrified that I was going to fire him on the spot. But I decided that unemployment was too easy. Let him come to work every day, wondering if it was his last. Let him serve the woman he had tried to shame. I walked past him toward the car, but before I could slide into the leather interior, Mr. Henderson, the general manager, came running out of the lobby, waving a digital tablet. "Madam Chairwoman," he called out, breathless. "Madam Chairwoman, please wait. We have a procedural question regarding the event billing." I paused, one hand on the roof of the car. Henderson skidded to a halt, adjusting his glasses. "I apologize for the interruption. As per standard protocol for family events hosted by ownership, the billing for tonight's engagement party was set to the internal house account. It was categorized as a 100% complimentary event under the Family and Friends discount code." He looked down at the tablet, then up at me nervously. "Given the abrupt conclusion of the evening and the arrest of Mr. Huntington, do you wish for us to keep the charges comped? Or should we void the event entirely as a loss?" I looked at the tablet. I looked at the Grand Hotel rising above me, its windows glowing with the light of a party that had turned into a crime scene. I thought about the cold soup at table 19. I thought about the wine Julian had thrown on my dress. I thought about my mother yelling at me to leave. I thought about the $500 bond Bianca had thrown on the table as if it were garbage. They had treated me like a stranger. They had treated me like I had no value. So why should they get the family discount? I took the stylus from Henderson's hand. Cancel the comp. I said, my voice steady and cool. Revoke the family and friends status immediately. This was not a family event. This was a private rental by external clients. Henderson's eyes widened. You want me to charge full price, madame? Full price, I confirmed. Charge for the ballroom rental. Charge for the catering, including the lobster bisque they ate and the cold soup I was served. Charge for the security detail. Charge for the valet services. And add a 15% surcharge for the cleaning costs of the wine stain on the carpet. I tapped the screen, bringing up the total. It was just over $50,000. To me, it was a rounding error. To them, it was a catastrophe. And Henderson, I added, handing the tablet back, do not send the bill to the company. Send the invoice personally to the billing addresses of Robert and Patricia Brooks and the Huntington family residence. Split it 50-50. But Madam Henderson stammered. The Huntingtons. Their assets might be frozen due to the investigation, and your parents, they mentioned financial strain. I smiled. It was a genuine smile, the first one I had worn all night. Then I guess they will have to sell something. Maybe the hunting lodge. Or maybe they can return some of those diamonds. I do not care how they pay it, Henderson. Just make sure they do. I want them to pay for every single second of the time they wasted. Do not let them off the hook for a single penny. Understood, Madam Chairwoman, Henderson said, bowing slightly. It will be done first thing in the morning. I nodded and slid into the back seat of the Bentley. The door closed with a solid, reassuring thud, shutting out the noise of the world. The interior smelled of rich leather and silence. My driver looked at me in the rearview mirror. Where to, madame? He asked. I looked out the tinted window. I could see the tow truck in the distance hauling away the white Porsche. I could see the guests streaming out of the hotel looking confused and shaken. I was leaving behind a family that had never truly seen me, and a life that had been too small for my spirit. Take me home, James, I said, leaning back against the seat. And then tomorrow, take me to the airport. I think I have earned a vacation. Yes, madame. The car pulled away from the curb, gliding smoothly into the night. I watched the Grand Othello disappear in the side mirror. I had walked in there a scapegoat. I was leaving a queen. The bridge back to my family was not just burned, it was incinerated, and looking at the ashes, I felt lighter than I had in years. I had lost a sister, a brother-in-law, and parents tonight. But I had found something far more valuable. I had found my self-respect. And unlike their love, my self-respect came with a lifetime warranty. As the city lights blurred past me, I pulled my phone out one last time. I opened the family group chat. I typed one final message. Invoice is in the mail. Do not be late. Then I blocked them all. I tossed the phone onto the seat beside me and closed my eyes, letting the motion of the car rock me toward a future that was finally entirely my own. If you have ever had to cut ties with toxic family to save your own soul, let me know in the comments below. It is not an easy choice, but sometimes it is the only choice. Hit like and subscribe for more stories of justice, and if you are currently fighting your own battle, remember this. Your value does not decrease based on someone else's inability to see your worth. Sometimes you have to buy the whole building just to prove you belong in the room. Thank you for watching. The most profound lesson from Zara's night at the Grand Othello is that your self-worth is an internal fortress, never an external gift bestowed by family. When the people who are supposed to be your foundation become your ceiling, limiting your growth and disrespecting your existence, you have a moral obligation to yourself to walk away. True nobility is not found in a title or a luxury car. It is found in the quiet integrity of honest work and the courage to demand respect. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to fire your own family. If this story of justice ignited a fire in you, please like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs to be reminded of their power. What was your enough is enough moment? Tell me in the comments below.